Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar event. My name is Joshua. I'm going to be your presenter today. It's promptly 1 p.m. Eastern Time here, and so we're going to go ahead and get started. A few technical things before we get started on our topic today. If you've got click the little red arrow on the sidebar of your webinar control panel, allows you to minimize that, get it out of the way. Particularly important if you're using a single monitor, or if you've got a dual monitor set up, just drag that out of the way. Over to your second desktop, just allows you to get the full visual effect of the presentation today. We're working out of our A103 training workbook, pages 34 to 42. If you're interested in purchasing the workbooks, we try to have the workbooks follow along with the webinar topics or use them as the basis for our webinar topics whenever or wherever possible. You can purchase those workbooks from the workbook page on our website, of course. It is what I am using for the basis, printed material for the basis for the webinar today. So if you're interested in that, or if you already have Accounting 103, turn to pages 34 through 42 and follow along. If you have questions, please type those into the questions portion of the webinar control panel. I will do my best to keep an eye on those. And if I can't answer them during the event, I will certainly be happy to stick around and see what we can't do to get those answered after the conclusion of the topic here today. Please keep the questions on topic, meaning about our paying from a liability account or printing checks. Just because we want to be able to answer those questions for you, just may not be equipped to answer that, with what I've prepared for today's event. If you have further questions, of course, you can always contact our support staff at 800-533-5227, and we're happy to help. We are recording today's webinar event, of course, so this will be produced and available on the Support Center page on our website, probably sometime later today. If not today, then first thing tomorrow, but we're getting those out pretty quick anymore these days. All right, so let's jump into accounting real quick here. So let's talk about paying from a liability account. When we're talking about liabilities, when we go into our chart of accounts, of course, what we're talking about here is if I go down to collapse all, anything that's listed here on the left-hand side called liabilities, right over here. So if I click on the plus sign next to the 200 accounts, those are our liabilities. Let me get out my highlighter, draw some focus. Right here, number 2, liability accounts. Anything that we owe or pay is categorized as a liability. Accounts payable is a liability, okay? Our vendors don't have individual separate 200 account numbers assigned to them like we do the others. So if I click on the plus sign next to accounts payable, we see all of my vendors here. They're still categorized as liabilities. They just don't have an independent 200 number assigned to them. But anything that's categorized under those liabilities is a liability, monies that we're paying. So as the wording or the subject there talks about, liabilities are holding tanks, or as I like to say, holding accounts. They hold money that is going to be ultimately paid somewhere else. Okay, they can hold monies that are going to be paid out based on bills that we entered to vendors or payees. They can hold monies that are stored in from our payroll processing, for things like our taxes, 941 taxes, state taxes, local pension payments, health insurance. Anything that's deducted or withheld from payroll can be stored in those liabilities. Also, monies that are put in there from or transferred in there from, say, donations that are ultimately going to be paid out to another, oftentimes third-party nonprofit, otherwise also known as pass-through accounts or pass-through monies for things like emergencies or disaster relief or special collections or things like that. Money maybe that the church doesn't want to see on the treasurer's report as income. And as we see here under our 200 liabilities, we see a section called pass-through accounts, crop walk, housing for habitat, hurricane relief, etc. Okay? And finally, loans or mortgages or lines of credit, monies that are oftentimes considered long-term liabilities. For example, these other ones might be considered short-term liabilities or monies that are owed, but also liabilities. And as we clearly see on our chart of accounts, we have a liability down here labeled mortgage payable. Okay? So those are just some common examples of monies that are ultimately going to be stored in a liability and paid out either in the short term or in the long term. And we're now on page 35 of our workbook. So let's talk about paying the 941 tax deposit. Okay, for those of you that don't have Church Windows payroll, you're going to have to just kind of be patient with us here while we talk through this. But basically, monies that are deducted from your employees are going to be paid out, and we would generally do that by going into payroll reports and say pay period deductions report. We're going to go to next. Here we would enter the deposit schedule or period that our deposits are paid. Could be semi-weekly, could be monthly, could be quarterly. You have to determine that. But then we would run our pay period deductions report for the period. In this case, we're going to assume it's monthly. And then right down here, we see down the left-hand side where it says 941 deposit. I'm talking about right here. So right here, 941 deposit down the left. And we can clearly see here that our 941 deposit for the month of January is 2202.72. We should always use the payroll module to have it tell us what we owe. Don't assume that the balance in the account in accounting is what you owe. It may not be, okay? Oftentimes it will be, but many times, in some cases, it will not be, okay? So once we've determined that amount, we're then going to minimize payroll. We're going to jump back in here into accounting. We're going to close. We're going to go right here into pay bills, okay? Let the payroll module tell you what you owe. So when we go into our pay bills window, we're going to go right up here to quick pay and view vendors with a balance. Now, vendors can also be, we could justifiably put in liabilities with a balance. When we click on that, we're going to see all of our vendors and liabilities with a balance to be paid. So notice right up here, we've got our one account called 941 taxes payable. Notice it does have a larger balance than our balance that we owe for January. Maybe we're a little behind in recording those. But in any case, the balance for that 2202.72 is in this balance. We're okay with paying that, okay? Basically, we want to make sure that even if you're not using Church Windows payroll, that you've got the balance in the account to be paid, okay? You need to know how much you need to pay to the IRS, okay? So again, as the bullet point there on page 35 talks about, using the pay period deductions report will tell you that based on your deposit schedule that the IRS establishes based on your tax ID, okay? You can also use the pay period deductions report to see what your state and local taxes are, if applicable as well, okay? We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. Again, we've got a lot of other things to go through here, so I want to make sure we're trying to allow as much time as possible for everything. So again, at the top of page 36, it points us into going into pay bills, quick pay, and view vendors with a balance, okay? So in this case, let's say we are going to be paying our 941 taxes today. So we put a check mark in that select box on the left. If I wanted to pay any other of my liabilities here, okay, these balances are generated in these accounts through some other way, like say from payroll or from donations or from journal entries or something, but they're not recorded as bills, okay? They could be, but they're not in this case. So they're not going to show up with bills. So here's an example right below that of our crop walk, again, one of our pass-throughs, or our disaster relief recovery, okay? So we're going to say we're going to want to pay 3 of these payments in here, okay? One, our 941 taxes, also our crop walk payment for January, or for that was a carryover from December of 2020, and our disaster relief recovery, okay? So we're going to put a check mark in the select box, and we're going to click the button that says Create Payments. Okay, so notice that on the left-hand side, it's also dating it now May 5th because that's the date that we're on our CPU or our calendar. Well, we're not going to date those. We're going to backdate these into January. Okay, so we're going to go back, and we're going to make these like January 4th. Okay. In this case, let's say maybe make our payment for our 941 taxes January 31st. I can make those any date I want independently, okay? We're moving left to right. Once I've edited my date of my payment, then I want to make sure that the asset account is the account that I'm wanting, okay, that they're being paid from. The most important and critical portion of this process is this section right here called amount to pay. Okay, let me get up my highlighter again. Right here, amount to pay. For these particular types of balances, okay, where they're not bills, it doesn't assume that the balance that's in that account is the amount that I want to pay, okay? So you have to determine and enter that. Okay, even though the balance may be something different, it's waiting for you to enter what you're wanting to pay. Okay, so right here under my amount to pay for my IRS, I'm going to put in my 2202.72. Down here under my disaster relief or my or crop walk, I'm going to put in its balance, which was $465. Finally, I'm going to put $1275 in here for my disaster relief, which happens to be made payable to Red Cross Haiti. Okay. Then I'm going to choose my appropriate payment method. My 941 taxes are paid electronically through EFTPS, so I'm going to change my payment method for that one particular payment to EFT. I don't have to set a default payment, and they don't all have to be the same. What that means is I can pay multiple vendors or liabilities simultaneously and make each payment method separate. I don't have to post my EFT payments separate from my computer checks, from my manual checks, or what have you, okay? So I can change those independently. And then over here, I would enter any comments that I'm wanting if I want to appear on the stub on the payment, okay? For right now, we're going to simply click Post. But before we do that, we're going to click the button up here that says Show Running Balance, okay? So we're now down at the bottom of page 36. So we notice here under our Show Running Balance window that our adjusted balance for both crop walk and disaster relief recovery, or Red Cross, are 0. Also, my 941 taxes payable is now lower by my 2202.72. We're simply ensuring that the transactions are having the desired effect that we're wanting before we post them. Okay? If they're wrong, I can make the adjustment before I post it and verify the adjusted balance is correct before I post. Okay? So again, checking your date occurred, your asset account, you enter the amount to pay. If this were a bill, I would click on any of these and it would reveal the bill amount that I'd entered below it. But they're not. Okay? So I have to tell it how much I want each payment to be. Okay? With its appropriate payment method. If I were entering manual checks, I would choose manual and plug in the check number. Okay? Once I have the, and basically 37 talks about the same thing, paying money from a pass-through liability. Okay? Anything that's showing up with a liability with a 200 account is all going to be treated the same way. Okay? So again, an example that it talks about on the page 37 at the top talks about crop walk, those monies, or disaster relief. Those are monies that are crediting over from donations. Money is being given through donations, and I'm linking those to my donation modules. Let's save our batch, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So here my batch has been saved. I can now safely close out of my pay bills window. When we go up to our transfer donations, and I click on the tab called Default Account Links, we notice now that if we scroll down near the bottom here, accounts like Crop Walk, notice Crop Walk right here is linking to my 230.020 account right here, 230.020. So I'm sending that money right from the giving account in donations for either Crop Walk or disaster relief or flood giving or what have you, right into the respective liability, completely bypassing my treasurer's report. Okay, that is the reason. We don't want these monies to show as part of our profit and loss. So we want this to go right into those liabilities. That's how those monies are getting into that account. Okay. So with that being said, I also want to point out that right here when we go into manage accounts and we look at our liabilities again and we expand that, my account says, under my pass-throughs, says disaster relief recovery. Well, when I click on that account and I go over here to my vendor payee tab, This right over here on the right-hand side is where I would enter that vendor or payee information that I want on my checks, okay? It's really important to understand is I'm not going to be paying multiple vendors from the same liability account, okay? Because if I were to go in and pay this month's, vendor to Red Cross, and next month I'm going in and I'm paying it to, a different third-party vendor, it's going to change the whole history of that liability for the year back to whatever my current vendor name is. So you want to make sure that you're keeping these accounts and liabilities completely separate from other liabilities or pass-through monies, okay? So if I've got different pass-through accounts, I'm going to set up different giving accounts in donations. I'm going to set up separate liabilities in accounting, and I'm going to link them. I'm going to make each one of those accounts exclusive to the particular vendor or payee or third party in this case that I'm paying, okay? So here, let's go back to our regular drawing tool here, and let's go back into our pay bills where I saved my payments batch, okay? So again, it saved my work. I'm now ready to pay these, okay? Yeah, and I've kind of a little skipped ahead there a little bit. On page 39, it talks about, very important note, it's important in accounting that you pay only one vendor out of a liability account because of the audit trail, okay? I don't go in and change the vendor name or payee name each time I want to make a payment because it changes the history to whatever that current information is. So here I am back in here ready to post these payments. Got everything set up. I'm going to do a quick double check, and then I do post, okay? Then I would go into my print checks and print my checks to those particular vendors or payees as needed, okay? So again, that's just pointing out on page 39 that I really want to have, so I've got a clear audit trail for each one of those vendors, pass-through liabilities vendors, taxes, what have you, that I'm paying for each of them separately. I don't want them to get all convoluted and commingled together. When I want to simply run a list of transactions and payments that I posted to a particular liability, I can do that so long as the accounts they're kept completely separate, okay? All right, so with a couple minutes left, let's talk about printing checks real fast, okay? Because that's what we're talking about here is now going into print checks. When I was at Pay Bills, I could click Post. I could also click Post and print checks. If I'm ready to print those checks right away, I'll do Post and print checks. If I don't, I can still go in, close out, and go right here on the bottom right down here to print checks, okay? What do you know? The checks that I've got waiting to print that I posted for those two other vendors, Crop Walk and Red Cross Haiti, are here waiting to print, okay? Starts with choosing your date occurred, the check date, okay? What date do you want to print on the check? If that's different from today, then make it, backdate it to whatever date you're wanting. Choose your check layout. So are we printing using stub check, check stub stub, or stub check stub? Or have you gone in and customized your check layouts using the check designer function here to the right? Maybe you have. If so, you might have something other than the templates that are in here, okay? In this case, we're going to choose our template is stub check stub. It's then going to list any bank account or asset that has checks waiting to print. In this case, we've only got our Huntington Bank checking account. Then we're going to choose one of the things that this talks about right here. We might go a minute long, folks, here. Sorry. You put a check mark on the left next to the print box for any checks you're wanting to print. So if there's a check in here you're not ready to print yet, you would uncheck that, okay? Then it would only print the ones you've got checked. But when we're ready, we're either going to do get start next check number, or we're going to key in the check number that we're wanting to enter. By choosing that get next check number, it'll try to pull in the last check number from that account that it sees. You have to exert some caution on that, though. When I'm ready, I go to print. It opens up my preview of my check ready for me. Of course, I've got to make sure that my check stock is in my printer, of course. All right. And then, whoops, I put away the wrong paper here. Sorry, folks. Give me a second. No, I did it right. Okay, we're good. Then we have to go to the print button in the upper left corner, right up here to physically send it to our checks. We're going to actually change it to something like PDF. I'm basically kind of tricking it into thinking it send it to a printer. But then we want to hold off and examine those checks because it's going to pop up and say, did the checks print correctly? Okay? So if they did print correctly, then I would say yes. Okay? But if even one of them did not, I would say no. Okay? So then it would pop up and it would say, indicate which checks, if any, printed correctly. So if, say, my crop walk did and my Red Cross did not, I would only check the one that did and I would click OK. And boom, it puts the other check back in the print queue that I still need to print. Okay? Full control. But you've got to wait and answer that question after you have pulled the checks off the printer and examined them to ensure that they're presentable. All right, folks, I've gone a couple minutes long. I apologize for that, but we're going to end our topic for today there.